Uh-oh, kiddos, I think it's time for us to have that talk. It's time for us to talk about Isom number 1. Now, if you have been alive and looking at anything connected to the internet over the past few months, you've probably at some point heard about this book and its creator. I've even talked about him on my channel before he was even talking about making his own comic. So it was just bound to be that I was going to end up reading this book. We all knew it was coming, and if you've seen me on some of the other streams that I've been on, you've already seen me kind of talk about this a little bit. But as I mentioned every single time, I was going to do an actual review of the book, so that's exactly what we're here to do today. Now, before we get into it, obviously there's no digital component to this, so this is going to be like the way that I used to do my comic reviews, where I'm going to have to hold this up to the camera for you to see what it is that I'm talking about. It's fine. We're going to get through it. The other thing is this is a pretty thick book, so I'm going to be moving through this rather briskly, kind of describing generally what's going on, but I think the story lends itself very well to that type of review. So, also before I go any further, I'm just going to mention there are probably going to be a bunch of jump cuts in this video because I'm dealing with the tail end of a sinus infection. So, I mean, if you're just listening to the audio, you won't even notice it, but if you're watching it, you're just going to notice there's going to be a lot of jump cuts because of that exact reason. It's not going to slow down my momentum, but I'm doing it for your benefit. I don't think you want to listen to me clearing my throat and coughing that many times. We're going to talk about a lot of things here, and I'm going to be as honest as possible because I did enjoy the story. I'm gonna say that off the bat. It's going to be a positive review. We already know that because, like I said, if I could admit that I liked the story, then it's going to be a positive review. But there are things in here that, you know, I would critique just the way that I critique literally anybody else's comics. I've done a lot of these reviews now, both mainstream and independent stuff, so nothing's going to change just because I happen to be reviewing a book by somebody who I do have some respect for. Now, to properly set this up for you, one thing that I do want to mention is that the story is actually set in the fictional location of Flores Park, Texas. Flores Park is the fictional part. Texas does exist. The reason why I bring that up is because most often stories have always been placed usually on the East Coast, sometimes on the West Coast, and you know, very rarely do you see them, you know, in other countries like Canada, Brazil, wherever it might be. Every so often you see stories set other places. Very rarely do you ever see stories set in the South, specifically in Texas. I don't know what it is. I'm not going to, you know, throw any stones at anybody for that because I myself have thought about doing my own stories, and I've always wondered, like, would I actually set it in Texas? Why would I want to do that? But you know what? Seeing how it works here, I see that I don't know why I ever had that doubt. Anyway, so we're starting out in the fictional place of Flores Park, and we have here the governor talking on the TV as the police are watching his speech, and he's taking credit basically for the decrease in crime. And so he's saying, you know, what do we have to do to get some credit around here? And then they're trying to give the governor some credit by saying, like, well, he did reroute the funds that the last governor, you know, didn't give to us or whatever. And then they're also talking about, well, we can't forget about the masked weirdos, the superheroes that help us out, which they're part of a group called Alpha Corps. We're going to see them in just a second, so we'll get to that. But while they're in the middle of doing that, all of a sudden they start talking about one of the female heroes and, you know, how she could do stuff to them or whatever. So while they're doing that, all of a sudden he gets pissed off and tells them to get the hell out of his office. And then he has another one of them, you know, run in. She slams the door right behind her and he says, did you have to slam the door? But she says, look, you wanted to know about this when we saw her again. So she shows him her phone and he's, of course, shocked to see whoever it is that he saw. I'm assuming I already know who it was, and we'll see who it is in a second. It's Yaira, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, this is where we finally get introduced to the main character, Avery Silman, and he's actually on his ranch at the moment. So we can see where he's, you know, doing some of his training, and then he gets a phone call. Basically, we get the setup for what's going to rope him into the larger narrative here as he's on the phone, and we find out that this is actually his sister. So he's talking to her, and she's basically giving him the rundown on that they have this girl, and their mom is someone that is known to them. She's wanting to know where she's at because this girl was apparently part of like an internship with this company, and she just has disappeared. Nobody knows where she's at, and now the mom is worried. So his sister is asking, can you go and look for her? But he says, it's really not my problem. I have no reason to get involved with any of this. She says, look, if you're not going to do it for your sister, then, do it for Mrs. Newman. So that's when they hang up the phone. And he's thinking to himself, well, it's really not my problem, but if I didn't help Mrs. Newman, my mom would kill me. So this is where he decides, yeah, let me go ahead and go do it. And I think many of us know what that's like. There are things that you don't want to do, but you know that if you didn't do them, your mom would be upset with you, and you don't want to have to deal with that. So I completely get it. Anyway, he goes and he's talking to his right-hand man here, who helps him like with running the business and everything. And so he's telling him, like, yeah, I'm going to be going into the city. I'll be back later or whatever. So he's going, he takes a shower and takes off from there. And he's basically thinking to himself, I keep trying to just live out my life in peace, like out here, but for whatever reason, I keep having to go back to the damn city. So he's going back to go and do that. And that's when we switch scenes over to this fight scene that's actually currently in progress. We see the cops are having a little bit of trouble as they're being assaulted here. And this is when we are finally introduced to, yes, this is when we finally see Yaira. Now, I'm going to be honest with y'all. I'm not too big of a fan of this appearance of Yaira. I think the thing that bothers me about it is that she has somewhat of this grimace going on that is not a very flattering look for her face. So, because you can tell she's meant to be, at least conventionally attractive. But the way that she kind of looks here, how she has a little bit more of a scowl, it comes across very unappealing, quite honestly, and a little bit uncanny. So there's something about it that it's not really gelling well with me. But then we get this nice little fight scene between her and Alpha Core because, the other heroes show up and they're fighting with her kind of to a standstill. And then we get another, like I said, it's this type of like look that when you put it on your face, it just does not look right. And I understand why we have this particular angle, why she's looking in this way. I understand what it is that we're doing. I feel like maybe the angle could have been tweaked slightly, or just something could have been changed to make it look different. Another thing that I think could have possibly helped throughout the whole book is possibly having a different person inking it, because the pencils, I can tell, very nice. It's the inking that for me creates a little bit of a problem with a lot of what I see here. So having said all of that, now we're introduced to Alpha Core because we can see where the middle one, his name is Brian Solari. He saves the girl, her name is Ingrid. And so we kind of get the introduction to them, and that they apparently know Yaira. So, because she recognizes him and then is saying like, oh, okay, so you have friends now. And then that's when we go back over to Avery, who is showing up to Club Merc, which is, where Jasmine is supposed to have been. So he comes up and he's asking for Darren, basically the owner, and he knew him, from when they were younger. So we kind of have this like face-to-face meeting with them, and he immediately, gives him the handshake and everything. He welcomes them in and is telling him, I haven't heard anything about you, so you must not be doing very well. And then he asks him, did you come here for a job? Because I could use some extra hands in the kitchen. He says, no, thank you for that, but I actually have something else that I'm here to talk to you about. He says, I'm not here to be in your business, but Mrs. Newman is looking for Jasmine. He says, and what? They sent you to me? What, are you a detective now? He's like, no, it's nothing like that. I need to know what's going on with her so I can, go tell her mom what's going on. So he tells him, follow me, and then he takes him inside, tells him to sit down. He's like, well, no, I'm all right. But he says, no, that wasn't a request. So, of course, they do sit down, and they have the little talk. He first takes a little walk down memory lane with them, talking about how he remembered when they were in high school that Avery tried out for football, but he didn't make the team, and then rather than complain, he just, never tried out again. And then meanwhile, his sister, who was very academically and athletically talented, she went on to earn all these achievements and awards and everything. And then he's even telling him, I never really envied you because you had everything going for you. You had both of your parents. You had a really stable home life. You could have gone on to be anything, and you really kind of didn't do anything with that potential. Meanwhile, someone like me who didn't have the advantages and the stable life that you had, I had to create everything that I have. And I did some of that, yes, and in less than legal ways. So that's just the way that it was for me. I was able to achieve, what I have all around me, this empire that I've built. And quite honestly, at this juncture in time, people like Jasmine are actually very beneficial to my business. But people like you, unless you're here to mop my floors, you are not beneficial to my business. So he tells him, look, I'm going to give you this saving grace, and I'm going to let you walk out of here. Go tell her mom she's fine and just leave it alone. This is none of your business. So he tells his bodyguard or whatever, like, make sure he gets an application and then show him to the door. So Avery tells him, look, I know you don't expect me to lie to Mrs. Newman. So just tell me, is she okay? What's going on with her? So of course that's when Darren is like, son of a bitch. He doesn't say anything, but he's like, I gave him an out and he didn't take it. So that's when he tells his man, like, all right, go handle him. So you would assume that's what's going to happen based off of, this particular matchup. But that's not the way that it plays out, very obviously, because immediately after we see where the bodyguard goes flying. And then Avery gets pissed off, telling him, oh yeah, and by the way, who the hell were you talking to like that? And then, as he's walking up to him, we get more fight scenes. And I gotta say, I really didn't expect this part where it kind of got a little bit bloody. Did not expect that to happen in this book. So I'm definitely going to award points for that one because I didn't see it coming. It genuinely took me by surprise. So then he's telling him, like, look, I will kick everybody's ass in here, but you are going to answer my question and you're going to do it honestly. So Darren tells him, like, all right, look, we have bigger things to worry about tonight, so I might as well have my elite take care of you. And this when he's like, elite? Are you hiring accepts now? Because basically accepts are what they call, powered individuals. So he's saying, are you hiring them now? And he says, well, I'm always for hire, if someone can afford me. So that's when they get into their fight scene, and we can see where very quickly Avery does not have the upper hand here. But of course he's not going to go down without a fight. So even though he's kind of getting his ass handed to him, he tries to regain some ground by saying, you've won nothing, and then he kicks him in the face. But finally he just slams him into the ground, which incapacitates him long enough for him to just throw him, as far as he possibly can. And that's actually while he's flying that he crashes into Yaira, and they both crash down to the ground, which then kicks off their fight sequence because he's assuming that Darren sent her to take care of him. She's thinking that he's undercover or something based off of his clothes, and then he's confused, thinking like, does this stupid ass think that this is a sting or something? So, like I said, they get into their little fight scene and everything. And then she's basically telling him, like, look, what do you all want? No amount of super police could stop me unless I wanted you to. And he says, super police? I don't know who you think I am, but I'm not them. She says, then why are you so damn strong? And we get one of these. I'm not gonna lie. This was actually a nice little effect where we get the whole movement. You used to see this happen a lot, like in Flash comics and stuff like that, when somebody who's very fast, you see the movement all the way through. So I thought that was a nice touch in there. And then she flies him up to basically give him the one-on-one up in the air. And so he's saying how he's tired of being held up like a rag doll and shit, because that's not what he is. So she decides she's going to go ahead and put him down. She says, I bet this will send a message to the right guy. So that's when she takes him and she throws him down. And while he's falling, we can see where he does, this little like flip, basically in a way to kind of break some of the speed that he's building up as he's flying down. And he's talking about how he's been able to train himself and he has a bunch of different abilities and everything. But unfortunately, flying isn't one of the abilities that he has. So that's when he hits the car. And we can see where he's kind of surrounded. The other thing I have to wonder here is they saw him falling. Like he fell right in the midst of Alpha Core. They saw him falling. They could have gone and gotten him because like it seems like all three of them can fly. So if they really wanted to, I think they could have caught him. But you know what might be splitting hairs. Honestly though, I do have to wonder. I mean, they're fast enough and they can fly. They probably could have caught him. Anyway, so now we come back out to the country. And we can see here where Sam is finishing up a transaction with this man named Jim. He's talking about how he needs, more supplies because he's had to move his mother and daughter onto their land and everything. And so now there are, more mouths to feed and they're not able to do as much with their land anymore. And so he's asking Sam, has it hurt y'all's business or anything? Because I've seen a lot of people moving out. But he says, no, honestly, like the business has remained the same. It's just we get less people who come in person to actually buy stuff. But he's talking to him and telling him that, Avery is basically planning on bringing delivery in-house so that way they don't have to pay, an outside company to go and deliver their goods to where it needs to go. So yeah, Jim is telling him how, Avery is just one of the most ambitious people that he's ever met and everything. And then, yeah, Sam is telling him, we do what we can around here and everything, but he's telling him, I'm getting ready to close up, so, you take care of yourself and everything. Then he turns to his two employees here and tells them, look, y'all can go ahead and take off for the rest of the night if you want. There is still more, things that need to be done. So if y'all want to stay and help out, that's totally fine too. So one of them says he's going to leave. The other says, yeah, I'll go ahead and stay. So that's when Sam goes up to him and is telling him, love the ethic. I think it's time that you met some of the ranchers and get trained up, because at this rate, we're going to need someone to replace our boss. Now we go over to the hospital. If you remember, Avery did fall into a car, so he should be in the hospital. I say should be because we're going to find out in just a second that he's not. But anyway, while they're walking, the doctor and the nurse are talking about how he could or he might not be in one of the excepts. She's saying he's not coming up in any of the databases and they can't find anything for him, as far as identification. But the doctor's telling her none of that means that he isn't one, since we don't have a complete list of every single person who has an ability. So we don't really know. And then she's talking about how there was also this little anklet that he was wearing and they couldn't figure out how to cut it off. And so they just kind of left it alone. So the doctor hears all that and he says, interesting. And so despite all of these different things that happened, you still decided to put him on the first floor. And then we can see where, yeah, the bed is empty. So he just took off. Now I have to be honest right here, that particular moment with the doctor saying that and then it ending, that could have been a first issue. That very easily could have been the first issue of this, because there was already, set up for a lot of different stuff. Avery's mission and why it becomes suddenly so important to him. Yaira already in the mission. Already in the picture. And then you also have Alpha Core as well that we've kind of been introduced to as far as a concept and some of the characters. So, all of that already kind of set up what I would have needed. For a first issue, I was already into it. I was totally fine. I actually used this as a natural breaking point. The first time I was reading this, I was like, all right, that's a perfect spot for me to close the book, go make some food, and, finish later. But of course, it's not my call. This is how they wanted to do the book, so totally fine with that. I'm just saying, I think that would have been a perfect spot to go ahead and wrap that up for a first issue. But let's keep going with it. So we see where Avery, yes, has escaped from the hospital, and he's talking about how he's here in the weird part of town, so nobody even notices that he's just walking around barefoot and in a hospital gown with bandages around, his head and everything. So he looks at at his little wrist thing that was on his ankle, and we see where basically that was the homing beacon, and his sister pulls up. He jumps in the car and she's asking, what the hell happened? So he gives her the quick rundown, I got into a confrontation, then I fell into a car. I went to the hospital and I escaped, so I'm alright. I just need you to take me so I can go get my vehicle, and then I can go change my clothes and I can finish dealing with this. She, of course, obviously tries to dissuade him from doing that, tells him, no, we'll just go to the cops, what you told me to do in the first place. I'm going to go ahead and do that because I didn't realize it was going to be this bad. But he tells her, no, honestly, cops would make this even worse, because now he knows that we're looking for Jasmine. So if we bring heat on him, he's just going to either do something to her, or he's going to make it seem like he did something to her to get back at us. He knows how we are, so we have to play this, very much close to our vest. So that's when he gets out and he's saying, truth be told, saving Jasmine wasn't my primary focus. I almost forgot about it. And then we get the joke in here, a little levity when she says, also your butt crack is showing, which, yeah, he is in a hospital gown still, so that does make sense. Anyway, he's saying, that clown talked down to me and that won't go unaddressed. So that's the other thing I kind of have to mention here. I like this about Avery. He's not a perfect hero by any means. At this juncture, he's very much motivated by a selfish motivation. And by that, I mean that, yes, he did go because at first he was thinking, I have to go and help Mrs. Newman's daughter. Otherwise, my mom would be upset with me. But then once he was disrespected while he was there, then it became a personal drive because he felt slighted. And now he feels like that is his main thing to correct. The Jasmine thing, as he's mentioned, that's something that he forgets about. It's kind of like a secondary thing. He's not so much concerned with that. Now it's more so, I've been disrespected and I'm going to get back at this person. Like I said, not exactly the best thing for the best ambition for a hero to have, but that's kind of what you want from something. You want to have that progression. So I kind of like that we're starting at that place where he's still a little bit too in his own head, a little bit too selfish, and we can see where that growth is going to come later on. So did definitely enjoy that about it. Now we go back over to Sam, who's talking to the kid about, basically how people aren't very appreciative of where their food and everything comes from, which, having grown up in Texas myself, and especially where I grew up surrounded by fields, like cotton fields, corn, wheat, like we grew a lot of different shit like around where I lived. So yeah, a lot of people don't ever think about that, and they don't realize what type of communities. A lot of times it's the communities that they like to talk shit about. Yeah, we're the ones growing y'all's food, so you're welcome. Anyway, and your clothes, you're welcome. So anyway, he notices as he's on the phone with Avery that there's a door that's open, and that shouldn't be, because he didn't leave it open. So he goes to investigate. We see where he has his gun and everything as he's walking in, as Avery is telling him, who knows when I'll be back. Could be tonight, could be days. I'm going to a certain club later. I'll hit you up if I need you. So that's when they hang up and Sam walks into the building, but we don't see what actually happens to him, because we go back over to Avery, who's basically on the stakeout right now. Another thing that I'm going to mention real quick, he drives a truck. We are in Texas, and this is very significant that he's driving a truck, because that's one thing that I very, very, very rarely, if ever, see in a comic, unless somebody's going like camping or something, and then they might be in a truck. A lot of times it's a Jeep. But here, yeah, you would absolutely see someone just driving a truck just like this. So, again, just kind of help to sell where it is that this story is set. I liked that. And quite honestly, I feel like I don't see trucks like this enough in comics. I see way too damn many of them in person, but I don't see enough of them in comics. So, that's completely different. Anyway, he's here talking to this man about Club Merc, and the guy's telling him, like, look, that place is not for you or I. That's above our pay grade and everything. He's asking him, like, okay, do they have girls around the spot? Doesn't look like much of a strip joint. He says, that's because it's not. But that spot is the spot. I doubt drinks are the only things on the menu. So he just kind of thanks him and everything. And then he drives off thinking to himself, I'm acting fake concerned. I really just want to punch him in his mouth. Darren's arrogant enough to write me off. Or is he? So that's when we go back over. Well, this is one of those scenes that I'm not particularly sure why we needed it in here, but let's just kind of go through it. We have these two in a club. We finish up what Avery was saying, because he says either way he can't expect me to come right back on the same night. And so we can see where we're actually at, the club itself. And then we go inside to these two as, he's kind of looking. She's asking him, like, all right, what do you see? And he says a bunch of rich bozos and a bunch of bozos pretending to be rich bozos. She says, well, yeah, you basically just described, what was it? You just described the entire Upper West Side of Flores Park, if not the city itself. Special people are those with influence among the stragglers who wish to be in their spots. Pretending. The pulse of town is maintained between these walls on this night. So he says, keeping tabs on the major movers without having to be everywhere. So you're thinking about buying this place out? She says, potentially. It's more about the idea and less about this specific place. Imagine having that knowledge base at your fingertips. He says, while remaining discreet or blending in. This is a perfect city, but we are the visitors. Something like that would be crucial. She says, if our last project showed us anything, it's that we need to start considering scale in our approaches. And then we can see where on the radio, the guard is getting a message that they have an issue out back. I will say it's a little bit, this particular scene probably, honestly, could have been left out, and I don't think that the continuity of the story would have been affected, because they aren't actually seen again for the rest of the story, and what they're kind of planning, we don't really know yet. I mean, it does drop in there that there are these two characters planning something, but like I said, I honestly feel you could have lifted this scene out and probably put it in a different issue or whatever, and it would not have hurt the story at all, because we go from, Avery driving over, and then we see where he's now outside of the club. He's getting ready to kind of like do his whole sneaking in thing. So he's walking up to Club Merc, and it says, my sense of pride is just about the only thing carrying me through. I know this is ill-advised, but this has always been me. When you plan, prep for the absolute worst, and when you don't have a plan, make it up along the way. I had never thought about it, but that's actually how I live my life. It was never a conscious decision, but that's kind of just, situations are what they are, so that's how we ended up. Anyway, so he's about to get ready to, infiltrate the club, and he decides to take a more subtle approach at first until he sees Jasmine walk by him, and then he takes down his hood. She recognizes him and says, Avery, what are you? Oh God. He says, I honestly didn't expect to run into you so easily. Your mother's worried about you. And he says, I'm not here to judge you. Just tell me if it's involuntary. But while he's talking to her, there's someone who yells from off panel, "Hey!" And they tell him, why don't you go ahead and leave her alone? Leave the young lady alone. He says, "Jasmine, you got to give me something." But rather than say anything or do anything, she just runs away from him. So he yells, "Jasmine," and then the guy walks up to him saying, "You cannot be harassing our ladies. You need to move." And then Avery says, "Let me ask you something. Why is putting your hands on someone so aggressively your first instinct?" Well, okay, I gotta be honest. I don't think that was his first instinct. His first instinct was to tell you to leave her alone. And then, when he kept talking to her, that's when he came up, put his hands on you. I've got to be honest. If we're talking about first instinct, his first instinct was the thing that he actually did, which was to tell you to leave her alone. So, granted, I understand he doesn't know that you know her, but, So that's when they're getting ready to, rough him up and everything, thinking this is going to be a very easy fight, right? There's two of us against just one of him. But then they very quickly realize, oh shit, no, we don't have this under control. Because then he knocks both of them out. And then he leaves them basically just there unconscious as he walks up to another set of guards. And so this one's telling him the interest is on the other side. And then, when he doesn't stop, they're like, oh shit, this is that guy from earlier. So, of course, they get into a fight with him and, doesn't end very well for them either. And then he tries to tell this last guard, "Take me to Darren quietly. Then I won't have to tear this place apart." But of course, the guy gets on the radio from what we saw earlier and says, "We have an issue out back." He says, "All right, fine. Then what's about to happen is entirely on you." So from there, he throws him through the door, and then we can see where he just walks in and is immediately surrounded by a bunch of people. So he's telling the girls or the ladies, "Ladies, I suggest you take this opportunity to leave. I ain't sparing anybody that's crazy enough to jump in this." And then we can see where one of the girls is like, "Who is this jackass?" And they're like, "A very bold man who will be lucky if he can still walk after he's escorted out of here." And so we can see where, yeah, there's going to be another confrontation. So he's trying to tell them, like, look, things don't have to get out of hand. Just basically take me to Darren. But then another guy comes walking out of the door. He says, "Oh shit, this guy comes walking out of the door and says, I got the alert, we got the big guy coming down. He should be here pretty soon." And then it says, "Looks like you'll be seeing someone, all right." And he says, "All right, fine, so be it." He tells the guy in the back, "You by the back, hold that door for me." And then he, gets into, like I said, the fight scene and everything, where he starts fighting with all of the different guards and shit. And then from there, he does end up having... Well, he's about to fight the guy at the door, but before he actually can, the big dude comes out, pushes him out of the way and shit. So this is where we get another confrontation between these two. And he's telling him, "I told him we should have ensured your defeat, but even I didn't think you'd be dumb enough to come right back. This is why you heroes often end up dead." And he says, "I'm no one's hero. I came to your shot caller with respect and was met with disrespect. That cannot be tolerated. I'm going to make quick work of you, and then I'll walk in that sleaze fest and break Darren's face. Do not credit heroism when all of this takes place. Blame yourselves, but credit me." And that's when the guy's telling him, if you weren't so self-absorbed, you could see there is a lot of money to be made in being what you are. You wouldn't have to lose 3 consecutive fights for free. If you're special, they call you an except. You and I know that's a generalization. We differ in many ways. Different paths to being what we are. A scale. And this is why I'm not that fond of the term except. He says, it's just a term that people use to identify. It caught on and here we are. It has nothing to do with this fight. He says, and that's why it's a problem. It attempts to place people like us on the same plane. We are not equals, which is very true. They're not equal, as you can tell just from height, bulk, all kinds of different ways. They're definitely not equal. But anyway, they get into their fight again, and then he's telling him, since when could you do that, where he does this little, this spinning kick thing on him. He just tells him, shut up and fight. So he says, if I kill you tonight, there will be 0 repercussions. So we get this. I've seen this before. One thing I will say, I don't really know, because from this, he's going in, as you can tell, he's going in for the overhead type of hit. But then in the next one, they're both sliding back, which I'm not really sure how this particular action played out, because the way that he comes in for this overhead swing, I don't know that it would toss Avery back like this. I could definitely see it pushing him down, but I don't know if it would slide back that far. Would it? I don't know. But anyway, so again, like I said, we continue with the fight scene, and it does kind of go on, we get plenty of the action going on here as they just kind of throw each other around and shit. And then we get this part where Avery goes and he's running up the wall. And then we see that he has, I'm assuming, not steel toe boots, but I guess adamantium tip boots, because I don't know what type of shoes you have that can dig straight into brick walls like this. That is impressive, though. I'm going to give him that. That's impressive than a motherfucker. Anyway, so he jumps off of the wall, crashes into the big dude, and this is where we can see where he finally, he got the upper hand. He was able to knock him out. And so as he's standing there over him, all of a sudden the cops come up and they're like, wait a minute, they recognize the big guy. So they go to help him out, and they're trying to tell Avery, like, you need to freeze, stay where you are and everything. He's like, really? You're really going to take this scumbag side over mine? All right, well, damn. So he just takes off running. And he continues running as the cops are continuing to pursue him. And they're even talking about, like, well, is he able to fly? Because I know, like, they know that some heroes or some of the powered individuals can fly. They're saying, I called it in during the chase. He won't get far. And the other one's saying, he will if they're not looking to the skies. This could be an Alpha Core problem. So we see where he continues, to run. He finally gets back down to ground level and is able to, get his truck. And then he drives over to his sister's house. She answers the door. He goes inside and starts telling her about everything that happened. How, he almost had the situation handled, but then the cops showed up. So he wasn't able to go and, like, finish, dealing with the whole problem and everything. But while they're in the middle of talking, that's when his niece shows up. So the mother's, like, his sister's trying to tell her, you need to go back to bed. But he says, it's all good. I should come see her more anyway. I know it's been tough on you without Terrell. She says she's handled this about as well as anybody her age could, but she does ask about you a lot. So he's telling her, he was a good man, basically talking about, her father and how he couldn't have asked for a better brother-in-law and everything. So he takes her back to bed. He goes and he puts her down. And then this is when she basically decides to reveal to him that she was able to figure out that he has powers. And when he asks, like, well, how did you figure it out? Basically, she describes it by saying that she makes everybody carry her. And what she's been able to tell is that everybody else, as she's gotten bigger, everybody else has started to strain to actually carry her. But he's never actually had that problem. So he tries to explain it away and say, no, I've just been lifting more weights, but that was a good guess. That was a nice try. So he goes back out and tells his sister she's way too smart for her own good. And she's like, oh, I know. And then they're, watching some of the security footage of Jasmine. And his sister is talking about how she has to be terrified. She has to be really scared. But he says, no, not in this moment. She's not. Look at the way she's checking her surroundings and everything. She's not scared. She's upset. She's really angry. So he says the hesitation says a lot. It's about time. Something may have happened too early. Something she thought she could hold off. So she's asking, you think it's Darren on that call? A debt maybe? He says, don't know. And right now, I don't care. We have to look out for us now. I'm out. You need to carry that piece wherever you go. Because when she answered the door earlier, he was like, why did you not have the gun that I gave you? I gave it to you for a reason and everything. So this is when we go. And he's also told her, like, take it with you even to your job. So we go back over to Darren, who has all of these different people assembled, and he's talking about how empires are built and you never stop building them, but that you also notice, when they start to crumble and everything. So he's talking about how he likes to think of himself as the top dog in this area, but he's not the only one. And every so often, you get that baby gangster who decides, okay, I'm going to take the top spot from the top guy. And then he gets his head blown off. So it's usually never that big of a thing. And he's telling them, we've always thought of this club as untouchable. Like this, no one would be stupid enough to actually try and attack us here. So the fact that he's coming here and creating a problem for us, we cannot let that go unaddressed. He's telling them he's doing all this for abroad, which is exactly why this cannot be dealt with delicately. This would galvanize our enemies. So we're going to address this. It'll be a message for all. My history with them gives us an advantage. I'm sending a memo in the morning with details of this man and what I expect from you. You'll immediately realize one thing. Certain things ain't off limits. The next morning, we see where Avery shows up here at Taylorsville, and the man is telling him, actually, we don't open quite yet, but then he recognizes Avery and calls him Isom. So he tells him, actually, no, just call me Avery. And really? Damn, you have a very long memory. So he's telling him, well, yeah, you never really forget somebody like you, somebody who you were the only person who ever returned something to me. It's not the type of thing you forget. And Avery tells him, it was meant to be more symbolic, by giving it back. It meant I was kind of, I was done with it. I didn't need it anymore. I was walking away from this life, but you know, some things have come up and actually I might possibly need it if you still have it. So they continue walking and he's talking to him, telling him, you know, this, so what's going on? Because this place used to just be like a little rinky dink store. So what's going on with all of this now? So he's telling him, yeah, you know, ever since, you know, what we went through back in the day, I've had a lot more business come in and the business itself has, you know, advanced and matured. And he goes on to tell him how he's actually like gotten access to a bunch of different materials and shit that don't even exist in abundance here on our planet. So pretty cool type of stuff. But anyway, he tells him, you know, he used to work also with the he was working with like a wrestling league to make costumes, and then once he retired from there, he went on to doing all the rest of this. So he's talking to Avery about it, and Avery is asking him, you know, aren't you scared about being out here that somebody might try to break in and, you know, steal all this amazing stuff you're making? But he's telling him no, because honestly, I have clients that that would quite honestly bring the world to an end if anybody even thought about trying to do something to me. But if somebody really were that stupid, I have top of the line security. Like, for example, if you were to get stupid and want to try something right now, you would not make it to the door. And so Avery is like, easy. He's like, hey, you asked, so I was just letting you know. Anyway, he tells him, yeah, I do still have your suit. It's all right here and everything, but no, you can't have it back. So Avery, of course, is taken aback and says, what? Why not? So he's explaining to him, look, this is a very old design that I did, and anything that you wear is a representation of me. So I'm not going to let you go out there in this. If you're going to do this, then we're going to have to make you a brand new one. And then he asks him, is there anything that you would want, you know, special for the suit? And he says, yeah, something that absorbs fall damage. So he tells him, you know, the first time when I asked you that question, you didn't even have an answer. So this shows some real growth on both of our parts. Anyway, he's telling him, you know what, it's been a while and it looks like you're more defined than you were when I first made this. So why don't you go ahead and slip it on, let's see how it looks, and then I'll just make the adjustments from there. So Avery steps into the little changing booth, and then he comes out in his costume and says, yay, what do you know, still fits. So we can see, yeah, he has the whole costume. And that's basically where this particular story ends. There is this backup story that deals with a band, and it has these two, like the singer and then this guitar player, and I think he also sings. I think he's also a singer. The two of them basically have like these magical powers, and then they're able to detect that something is coming, something that they can't ignore, and they're talking about possibly assembling others, but they're saying, no, we cannot make our move just yet. We have to wait until basically the problem gets a little bit worse, and then we'll be able to reveal ourselves and kind of go from there. So that's when he's saying, if it is time, they will soon find out. Our lyrics are not make-believe. So that's a little backup story. Nothing like too intense to really sink your teeth into on the backup story. And then, you know, there's just like a couple of other things. Like there's let's see, the solicitation, you know, for the next part. And then of course you also get this of Eric. I've got to be honest, this is not my favorite drawing of him. I have to be 100% honest, but I mean, not my book, so that doesn't really matter. Anyway, we also see where they say Yaira will return, and that's the end of the book. So overall, what did I think about it? What did you think about it? Like I said, I enjoyed the story itself. I liked the setup and everything in there. I thought characters that were introduced, there were a couple scenes, like I said, that one scene in the club with the two individuals, there were a couple scenes like that you probably could have lifted out and it wouldn't have hurt the continuity in the actual story here. Same thing with some of the fight sequences. You could have either taken them out or shortened them slightly, and it probably would not have hurt the story, at least by my approximation. Another thing is also, you probably could have pieced this out into 2, maybe 3, or maybe even 4 possibly issues. I have found, just for me personally, I saw those like moments in there where there was just like a natural break in the story, enough for you to go on to the next one. But I can understand not wanting to wait like that. Certainly, you know, Eric had the money to go ahead and just put out the whole thing, so why wouldn't you? But moving forward, it's going to be, you know, more of a smaller type of story. So not going to be like this every single time. That's why I was like, you know, I'm not going to be too critical on that. Yes, I feel like there were parts in there where you could have, you know, split it up, but I'm not going to say that that's the biggest problem, because giving me more story that I actually enjoy reading That's never going to be something I'm going to complain about. You know, if it's a good story, then yeah, I don't mind. I don't care if it's 100 pages. I don't care if it's 400 pages. I will read it. I might not have the time to read it all in one sitting, but I will read it. So I will. That's where I'm saying, you know, the art itself. I mean, not the art. The writing itself definitely kept me going. The art, on the other hand, like I mentioned in there, I really do enjoy the pencil work in here. From what I can see, everything is just very well done. Like I said, the thing that I would change is probably the inking. The inking, I feel, was the weakness here. I think that there could have been more done on that particular end. And I get it. You know, I don't know. I think Cliff inked it himself. I'm not entirely certain. I think he did, because he's the only one credited as artist, and then it has Gabe as colors. So I'm assuming that Cliff inked himself. That's the one thing that I would say, maybe consider like finding a different inker for it that could really accentuate Cliff's style, because it didn't work to full effect for me here. There were certain panels, certain like angles and everything that I feel possibly had you had a different inker, it probably could have worked. Even some of those panels that I kind of had like my issues with probably could have been fixed with different inking. That's just my guess on it. I can't tell you 100% for certain. I don't know for certain what would have made this any better, but that's just kind of what I'm thinking. When I look at it after having read it, I've read this multiple times now. I made sure that I knew exactly what was going on in this, so that way I could actually talk about the book and to try and shorten it up. I mean, this is 100 pages. So I mean, I needed to try and make this as brief as possible. I did not want to do a 2-hour long video, because who's going to want to watch all of that? So, and then on top of that, I have to edit it. So, having said all of that, what do I think of Isom #1? I think it was a really good start. Very solid start. I had my gripes about it, my little critiques that I could offer, but overall, very satisfying product. I know that I've seen some people talking. Obviously there were going to be people talking shit about this book. Some people pointing out how they were like, there are typos in this book. Well, yeah, this is from an independent creator, so one typo, I'm not really going to point out. There are comics coming out modern day from some of the big companies that these scripts, these finished pages, pass through multiple hands before they actually get printed, and those come out with typos from some of your favorite creators and companies. So, I mean, if we're really going to throw stones there, if I were you, I wouldn't throw it too hard, because you might end up with a whole lot of glass raining down on you. Just saying. If we're really going to point that type of stuff out, let's go ahead and actually go there. But, like I said, I do have I'm not going to say this is a perfect product. I wouldn't say that it's perfect. But it is really good. It is. It is exponentially better than a lot of the other stuff that I have read recently. So, having said all of that, I would like to know what everybody else's opinions are on this book. What did you, if you backed it, if you've read it, if you've seen other people's. I didn't watch anybody else's review on this particular book. I've heard what some other people have said about it, like on Twitter and stuff like that, but you can't really avoid things like that. It is what it is. At the end of the day, I wanted to give my honest opinion on this book and just kind of put it out there and see what people think about it themselves, because I think so often with so many of these things, what so often gets overlooked is the story itself, is the actual story that's being told in the book. I think we focus a little bit too much on what does the book mean and how much money did the book raise and all of that. I think we focus a little bit too much on all of that and forget that what makes an actual fandom a fandom is when they have a story, when they have a world to invest themselves in. And that's absolutely what this does. This absolutely gives you the world, and it gives you characters to already start finding some sort of familiarity, some sort of appreciation for. It's in here, and it definitely did very well on that regard. So that's why I hadn't made any videos talking about the Rippaverse or anything. I could have been like a lot of people and jumped on that algorithm bandwagon and just made countless videos talking about it. I could make, 10 videos just talking about this one review. I could have pieced it out. I'm not. I'm doing this one review and then I'm moving on. When the next book comes out, I'll probably do a review of that, but I'm not going to be talking about all that, because like I said, all that's cool, all that's fine. That's for Eric to do, his victory laps. It's not for me to talk about it. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, we defeated some group that we... Nah, we're here to talk about stories. When you come to my channel, you're here to talk about stories. I'm not here to talk about any fucking thing else. So, Like I said, having said all of that, please feel free to let me know what you thought about it down below in the comment section. Do all the stuff, you know, like the video, subscribe to the channel, do all of that fun stuff if you like. I'm not going to tell you what to do. Do what you want to do. But if you did enjoy this, if you didn't enjoy this, regardless of what your opinion is on it, just let me know what you think down below in the comment section. Let me know, were you already a fan of Eric July before he put out a book like me? I actually found out about him, the way that I actually found out about a lot of indie comic stuff was actually through Rippa, because I actually watched his video talking about the Supergirl series back at the same time when I was having my problems with the Supergirl series, the TV series that was on the CW. And that was my first introduction, and that actually kind of led me down a rabbit hole towards all other stuff, and that's how I got into like more independent stuff. But I also always kept my attention on the mainstream, as you've seen from my channel. So when this came out, I decided, yeah, obviously I'm going to read this. So like I said, if you were also the same way and you probably, you know, possibly knew about him before any of that, you know, any of this was ever even discussed, feel free to let me know about that down below too, because that's always an interesting thing to find out about. But if you're done here, go and read a book, possibly this one if you have it. And if not, then I'll see you on my next video.